co-founder and president of Convention of States.
Thank you guys. I'm a little bit out of sorts tonight, and I apologize for being a little bit tardy. I hate being tardy. You know, my family, I don't know if you guys might have families like this. My family, my wife's idea of being on time is you leave when you're supposed to be somewhere. I just saw you poking him. And my attitude is, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. So today, I flew in relatively early into the airport in Philly. I stayed at the hotel there, the Marriott that's right on campus there at the airport. I even got a nap in today, I'm happy to say. It's been a little bit of a long week. And then I thought, it's going to be no problem. I'm just going to pull out of the parking garage and I'm going to drive to the meeting. Well, it took me 35 minutes to get out of the garage at the Philly airport. So I'm a little bit out of sorts. I got a little bit lost here at the mall. Anybody have a challenge finding this place yet? It's a little bit of a challenge for me. I'm pretty challenged. You know, I'm not one of these fancy schmancy guys that when I travel, I've got a driver or people who take me around. People do tell me where to go. And generally speaking, the way I run my days, when I show up in a city, usually somebody says you have to be at this place at this time of the morning. I show up there, and the rest of the day, people just tell me what to do. So coming into a city on my own and being on my own, I just think it's very irresponsible of the people who scheduled me. Don't you think so? I cannot be trusted, that's for sure. Really excited to be here. This is the end of an Eastern Seaboard tour for me. And it's something that I've been talking about doing for, gosh, it's probably 2 years now. I've been to Pennsylvania quite a few times. I had not been for Convention of States to Maryland or to Delaware, so I had a chance to go to both of those states. I was in New Jersey. So I've been all over the Eastern Seaboard, and it's been incredibly inspiring for me. You know, if you travel around the country like I do, and I travel between red states and blue states, I go to all of them. I've been to 48 states, and I go to the state capitals in all of them. And if you go to the like deep red states around the country, you know, theoretically, my state, Texas, is a deep state. I say theoretically, not really quite true. We go to states like Oklahoma, Kansas, or Iowa, and you talk about the Eastern Seaboard, it's kind of dismissive, the attitude in those places. And it's not because of you guys, it's because what they see in the news, right? And they see New York, and they see Manhattan, and they see New Jersey, and they see Newark, and they see Pennsylvania, and they see Philly. And these are the things that they think when they think about the Eastern Seaboard. And so I think they're fairly dismissive of these states. And I have a completely different perspective. Because when I come to these places, what I get to do is to hang out with people like you. Right? And I get to see what I call the real people in these states, the real cities in these states. I'm generally not just in the big cities. I'm in the suburbs. I'm in the farm country. You know, I'm an hour and a half, 2 hours out of the city, and I see the people that make America great in all of these places. In the last week I was in Maryland, I mentioned that, and where Steve's from, and I was with Steve in Maryland, and we're out on a farm, out in front of this old tobacco barn. There were about 180 people showed up. I didn't know there were 180 people in Maryland. I was pretty impressed by that. Steve did a good job there. I was in Delaware, a much smaller state. If I had gone to Delaware, to the state capitol, literally 2 years ago, with the Convention of States team, it would have been me and 4 other people, maybe. And we had 125 people in the baking sun at the Delaware State Capitol in Dover on a weekday. Incredible. So this is what I'm seeing as I travel around the country. I was in North Carolina yesterday, and we were at the state capitol in North Carolina. And in North Carolina, I've been going there, I've been there a bunch of times, probably as much as any state in the country. And they have what's called the Halifax Mall. It's between 2 office buildings, which are the Senate and the House office buildings. And we go there, and I remember when I used to go there and we get, 20, 25 people show up for the mall. And I was excited by that. Get 25 people and you bring them into the legislature and they go around and they talk to their legislators, and that's a pretty good crowd to bring to the mall. And by the way, we figured out, and you guys might want to pick up on this tip if you have a big rally, figured out how to get a lot of people to rally. I figured out how to get Democrats to show up at a Convention of States rally. We have a llama that comes. They literally, the Democrat legislators come out to take their picture with the Liberty llama. Not us, not me. You know, I'm not Rick Santorum, not Rick Green, not Alan West. They're not interested. The llama there. I don't know what it is about the farm animal. They aren't animals, but maybe we can bring the llama over here. But we had yesterday on the Halifax Mall in the North Carolina legislature, somewhere between, I lost count, I'd say between 750 and 1,000 people. Incredible. That's pretty good, right? So I thought it was pretty good. Then I asked the state legislator, have you ever seen a conservative group show up with this many people on the mall here at the state legislature? And they said, never. Never in history. They said, on the left, yeah, I mean, because you can pay 750 union members to show up. But actual real volunteers, no, we don't see that. And so then I come here to Pennsylvania, and here we are in a church, which is my favorite place to be, in a church on a weeknight in Pennsylvania, in Plymouth meeting, and we get this kind of a crowd. You guys should be really proud of yourselves. Give yourself a good. You guys also put me out really bad. You totally screwed up my travel plans this week. I'm going to blame you guys if you live here. Which is, so on my calendar, it said Plymouth meeting. Okay, I can handle that, so that means I got a meeting in Plymouth, right?
That was last night.
Yeah, by the way, there is a town called Plymouth near Scranton. So all of my travel was booked to Scranton and home. Okay? And so I don't know who warned us about this, but somebody said, well, where are you flying into? And I said, Scranton. They said, well, that's about 2.5 hours from Plymouth meeting. Why aren't you flying into Philly? And so it launched a scrambled panic about 48 hours ago to redo all the travel. So, and then I talked to Rick Santorum and I told him the story, and he basically said, "You're an idiot." Everybody knows where Plymouth meeting is. So now I know where Plymouth meeting is. So you guys are already taught me something, which is awesome. The reason that I do what I do is because I love America. And I know that sounds really broad, and I know you all feel exactly the same way, but I mean something more specific when I say I love America. And by that, I mean I love Americans. Right? And we're Americans by virtue of where we live. Some of us, maybe somebody in this room, has chosen to live here. To the immigrants who come because they believe in this land of opportunity. Those who come legally, I say, God bless you for coming here and making the choice to be an American. It is an incredible thing to be an American, and it is a birthright, or it is an immigration right. It's something that some people choose, some are born to it, and it makes us extraordinary. And I get to travel all over the country, and I get to meet great Americans everywhere I go. You ever heard the phrase people say, well, we're just ordinary Americans? I don't meet any of them. I don't know what that is. I meet extraordinary Americans everywhere I go. And if I sat down with any one of you in this room tonight, one-on-one, if we got a chance to break bread together, have a conversation, what I would probably say to you at some point during lunch or dinner, whatever it is tell me your story. And what most people would say to me is, I don't really have much of a story. I'm just a regular person. But if I dig, and I know this from experience, and if I really ask and if I probe, which I love to do because I love people and I love their stories, I'm going to hear an amazing story. I'm going to hear a story about somebody who has had highs and lows in their life, who's been on the peaks and looked out across the horizon. I'm going to hear about the valleys that you've been in, the pits of despair, and how you overcame, and how you turned to God, how you turned to your family, how your neighbors helped, how your friends helped. I'm going to hear an amazing American success story. Because there's nobody that's ordinary in this country. And that's what makes this country so amazing. It's not because of the land. It's not because of even the Constitution. It's not because of our ideology. It's because of the individuals. And there's something wired into us, into our national DNA. And I say DNA, it doesn't mean you have to be born to it. Like you could, in my opinion, you could be born an American if you live in Venezuela. Or if you live in communist China, but you have a certain thing in your heart, in your soul, a certain craving for freedom, a certain belief in individuality, a certain belief in self-governance. People who live under totalitarian regimes, some people have this in their hearts. It's hardwired in. God put it in them. And people come to this country, or people born in this country and raised up in this country, and it's inside of us, and that's an extraordinary thing, this connection to the idea of self-governance. If we talk about Convention of States, and Convention of States, most people don't even realize it's a project of an organization, which was the original parent organization, called Citizens for Self-Governance. So I invented that name. It's a terrible name. It's such a horrible brand, and we debated it, and we discussed it when we came up with Citizens for Self-Governance. Nobody knows what self-governance is. What does that mean? You have to try to explain it to people. Having a brand that you have to explain to people is a bad idea. But we stuck with it because we realized if we are not a self-governing people, if we lose the idea that it's up to us individually to fix whatever ails our country, to fix whatever's wrong with ourselves, to fix whatever's wrong with our communities, if we move away from this do-it-yourself kind of idea that we are as a nation, then we lose the essence of what it means to be American. And so we became Citizens for Self-Governance. It's like 12 years ago. And I would say 12 years ago, if you did a search in the media, if you Googled the words self-governance, you would find very few references. I know, because we did. If you Google that today, you'll find millions of references to self-governance. And I'm proud to say we reinserted that phrase into the American lexicon, this idea of self-governance. It's really an extraordinary thing. How many people in this room have traveled out of the country? Raise your hand if you've been out of the country. So most of the people in the room have been in other countries. And if you pay attention to the culture of other countries, I'll do my best to stay in front of your camera. I'm terrible at that.
Would you do us a huge favor?
Sure.
Tip your hat back so we can
there
see
we
your
go.
wonderful face.
All right. See, I can take instructions. I've been married 28 years. So if you travel to other countries, and I'm going to give you an example of what happens in another country that shows you how self-governing we are here in America. I spent a bunch of time in Asia, spent a bunch of time in Japan. I love the Japanese culture, love Japanese food, love the warmth of the Japanese people. But Japanese people are very much rule followers, right? And this is the culture in most of the world. There's a boss, and the boss sets the rules, and if you want to do something different, you ask permission before you do something, right? And so if you were to walk into a restaurant right now, if a group of us walked into a restaurant, there are 8 of us, and there was no hostess sitting at the station there, and we saw 2 tables, and each table had 4 seats, then we would be likely to say, hey, somebody, let's push these tables together, and we'll make an 8-seater table, right? Anybody ever do that? Yeah. If you tried to do that in Japan, everybody in the restaurant would freak out on you. What are you doing? You have to ask the boss, and like people would panic, literally. I've done it. People panic because you're breaking the rules. Because you don't do that yourself, you have to ask permission. But in America, we're a do-it-yourself nation. We always have been by necessity. The people who came out over here on the Mayflower, right? They weren't asking permission, right? They got chased out. They were seeking religious liberty. They came across an ocean. Nobody gave them permission to land at Plymouth Rock. By the way, have you guys been to Plymouth Rock? Yeah, the rock is not impressive, is it? It's going to be a big, I thought Grand Canyon. Monument to the forefathers, so if you go to Plymouth, that's the thing to see. Anyway, so they came over here. They didn't ask anybody permission. They set up their colony. There was a colony set up at Jamestown. They weren't asking anybody's permission. They made their own rules. They did it their own way. And we've done that as a country forever. We don't ask permission. We fix it ourselves. We do it ourselves. We build it ourselves. We build things and do things that are absolutely impossible. We built a nation that was impossible. Literally. Think about how our nation was formed. We fought a revolution against the greatest empire ever known to mankind. The British Empire. The height of art and literature and culture and military prowess and technology at the time. The largest fighting force ever assembled in human history. The most well-paid, well-fed, well-trained, well-armed, largest fighting force in human history. We fought that fighting force because we just do stuff ourselves. And we do things that other people think are crazy. Right? We said, we're going to go to the moon. That seems crazy. We went to the moon, right? We said, we're going to defeat fascism worldwide in World War II. What were we thinking? That was bigger than our country, but it was not bigger than our ideals. Because we are the original DIY nation. It seems like they should have known about Home Depot back then, but that came much later in our history. So where does that idea come from? Where does this idea that we are a nation born of self-governance come from? You know, if you look at the American Revolution, by the time we fight the American Revolution, we already believe in this idea of self-governance, right? I mean, this is why we're willing to fight. My favorite story from American history is the story of a guy by the name of Levi Preston. Now, if you've ever heard me talk, you know I like the name Levi. Anybody know who Levi is in my life? There's a few people. Levi's my dog, that's right. I named my dog after an American Revolutionary War hero. And here's why I did, because I love this story so much. You understand, I love the American people. I love what it means to be an American. And the essence of self-governance comes from a guy by the name of Levi Preston. Most people don't know Preston's real story. They've never heard his name. I say Levi Preston. Most people don't know who he is. It's one of the tragedies of American history, because when we study American history, we study it based on what I call the great man theory of history, right? But there are movers and shakers, and there are people who are the fulcrums of history, the levers of history. George Washington, Adams, Madison, Jefferson, Patrick Henry says, give me liberty or give me death. We all know those guys, right? Every one of them. We know those guys. Right back there in the back of the room, we got it. So we know these people from American history. But the truth is, they're a tiny, teeny slice of American history. They don't really represent what the regular people were in American history. These are the heroes. They're the people, they wrote stuff, they gave speeches, they rode into battle on white horses. That's why we know about them. But what about all the men and women and families that actually fought, that actually sacrificed and died in the revolution? Most of them we don't know. A lot of them buried anonymously on battlefields, bodies never recovered by their families, stories never told. But we do know the story of Captain Levi Preston. See, Preston fought at Concord. And when he went out to fight that day, when the shot was heard around the world, he was 23 years old. He was a farmer. He had a wife and kids. He was not a military guy. But when the Minutemen were called, he went to fight. And the only reason that we know Levi Preston's story is because many, many years later, in 1843, Mellon Chamberlain was traveling around the country, and he was a young historian, and he was collecting the stories of the last remaining Minutemen. In 1843, they had been in their late 80s or early 90s. There were not a lot of them left. The average life expectancy back then was 54 for a male. So you think about that, and he was collecting stories from people in their late 80s, early 90s. If you went into a town and you asked who's the oldest person in town, and somebody was 80 or 90 years old, everybody knew. That was like Methuselah living in your town back then. Really incredible. So he's in North Carolina, and he comes across the town, and Captain Levi Preston's living in the town, and he finds Captain Preston, and he asks him a series of questions. Because he wants to understand, in 1843, the origins of the American Revolution. Where did it come from? Why did you go fight? Right? It's something we still want to know today. And he kind of thought that he already knew. And Mellon Chamberlain, in a telling of this story, says that he thought he already knew. But he really didn't. He asked him this series of questions. He said, Captain Preston, when you went out to fight that day, when you went to fight the Redcoats, what was it that you meant in doing so? Preston repeated the question, what did we mean? And he said, yes. Was it the Stamp Act? Were you frustrated having to buy the stamps, and it was a tax without representation, it was unfair and unjust? Preston says, I'm sure I never bought one. Governor Bernard locked them all in the harbor. So it wasn't the Stamp Act. So he says, well, was it the tax on British tea? It was a high tax on British tea. And he said, son, I was a farmer. We never drank any tea. We drank coffee. The boys dropped it in the harbor, and that was that. So it's not the tea tax. It's not the Stamp Act. So he says, well, maybe you were reading the great revolutionary writers. You're reading Milton and Burke, Montesquieu. And he said, I've never heard of those men. We read the Bible, Catechism, Psalms. Some of us read the Almanac. But those men you speak of, I know not those names. So it wasn't the writers, the Stamp Act, the tea tax. Here's a guy who actually went and fought. And so he says, well, maybe it was the heavy-handed British tyranny. You were just tired of tyranny, and you revolted against the tyranny. He said, tyranny never felt a whit. No tyranny, no taxes, no stamps, no great writers or orators inspiring Captain Preston, yet he went out and fought that day. So Chamberlain is stumped. He says, well, what was it then? Why did you go fight? And he said, son, when we went out to face them redcoats, we meant only one thing. We had always governed ourselves. We always intended to. Them redcoats, they intended that we should. That's important. That is the essence of the American political philosophy at the time of the American Revolution, said by a man who actually was willing to put his life and his family and his livelihood and everything on the line. I think it's the most representative statement you will hear of the political theory of that time. This is what people thought. Because for a very long time, they had governed themselves. You know, I mentioned the Pilgrims, and you've got the Mayflower Compact, the first compact here in the New World. The Mayflower Compact, a governing compact. And then if you jump forward in American history and you think about how did you study American history when you were a kid, you're going to go from the Mayflower Compact, and the next major event in American history is the Revolution. That's how I studied it. Now you gotta forgive me, I went to school in Los Angeles, California, so maybe I missed some stuff. Just saying. Had to make up a lot, remedial history. But the reality is that's how it is in most schools. You're gonna study Jamestown, the Mayflower Compact, the Pilgrims, and then you're gonna jump forward to the American Revolution. How long between the Mayflower Compact and the American Revolution? Anybody know offhand? It's really interesting. When I got asked that question, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. In fact, I'm not the smartest guy in any room, certainly not this room. But I just didn't have an answer. It's like I went to that file cabinet in the back of my head. It was just an empty, dusty drawer with cobwebs in it. There was no answer. Thinking, 75 years, 100 years? I had no idea, really. I could have guessed, but it was just a guess. It's 158 years between the signing of the Mayflower Compact and the beginning of the American Revolution. That's a long time. Generationally, that's at least 5 generations. So it's weird because we study American history and we go from the Mayflower Compact to the American Revolution and nothing happens in 158 years. Nothing. How can that be true? It can't be true. So when I first realized that, I heard Levi Preston's story. I wanted to know, why does Levi Preston have this attitude? Why is he so connected to this idea of self-governance? Why is it so obvious and so inside of him, so in his DNA, that he's willing to fight and die for it? I had to know. And so I started trying to find books about it. There aren't many books about that period in American history. I looked, I couldn't find much online, I couldn't find a lot about it, very little to read. And I happened to be blessed because I had a daughter at the time, she's since graduated, who was at Hillsdale College in Michigan. My daughter Lucy went to Hillsdale College, and she was in her first year at Hillsdale College when this question came up. And Patty and I had donated a little money at Hillsdale College because we loved the college so much. And so I got a chance to go to their homecoming football game. And because I had donated a little bit of money, I had a chance to sit in the president's box at Hillsdale's homecoming football game. Now I know that sounds really fancy. It's not. It's like a high school. It's like a small high school. Right, so we're sitting in this little box together, and I happen to be sitting next to Larry Arnn. You guys know Larry Arnn, right? The president of Hillsdale College, great man, brilliant guy, great thinker. And this guy knows a lot about American history. And I thought, man, I'm going to find out about this period in American history. So the middle of the first quarter, I found myself sitting directly next to Larry Arnn, and I lean over to him, and I say, hey, Larry, I have a question for you. And he just looks at me. And I said, trying to figure out this period in American history, like right before the American Revolution. I want to know, has anybody written any books about the period from Jamestown to the time of the American Revolution? And he said, I have only one answer for you. And I said, yes. He goes, could you please shut up until after? I'm not kidding. It's exactly right. Yeah, he's hilarious, but he was serious. And so he watched the football game. I watched the football game at halftime. I got to chat with him about this, and he turned me on to some really great books. If you're interested in that period, Bernard Bailyn, B-A-I-L-Y-N, writes some books about that period in history. And Pauline Maier, M-A-I-E-R. Odd spellings for both the names. Great, great historical writers. And what I learned from reading about that period in American history is it's the most important period in American history. Kids ought to study it. We all ought to study it because during that period in American history, we learn as a people, as a nascent nation, to govern ourselves. We figure it out. We bring some of our institutions over from the old countries. People have a pretty deep understanding of the Bible and biblical history. They understand world history. There's a lot of people that read philosophy, Greek history, Roman history are widely known. People are very literate at the time. Remember, there's no television, there's no YouTube, there's no movies, there's no recorded music, so people read for entertainment. And so there's a lot of reading going on, and so people understand these histories, and out of this, we become a self-governing people. So by the time Levi Preston is challenged by the redcoats on the field of battle, his father governed himself, his father's father, father's father's father, and so on for 5 generations. So to Levi Preston, the idea that some redcoats were going to come to town and tell him how to live his life, outrageous, unbelievable. Who do these people think they remember? Preston was a true American. Though he was a British subject, he was not British by mentality. He was British by birth, he was British by law, but by mentality, he was an American. And so he is the essence of what it means to be American, and that history tells us where we get it from. So let's jump forward over 2 centuries to where we're at today. I can guarantee you, in this group today, every single one of you has that feeling inside of you. When the government says, this is how you're allowed to use your property, it just grinds you. When the government tells you, this is what kind of car you can drive, this is what kind of fuel you can put in your car, this is what kind of paint you can paint your house with, this is how you have to wear your seatbelt, this is how you have to wear your helmet, this is what kind of toilet you're allowed to have in your house. Imagine Ben Franklin. Oh, Dr. Franklin, I'm afraid your outhouse is using too much water. I think Franklin would have pushed him in his outhouse. You know, several years back, I built a new office on our old property in California. I can say this publicly now because I don't live in California anymore. And during construction of the new office, we built a barn. I have to say I built it with no permits because I just wasn't going to do that deal with the city and the county. And along the way, my contractor came up to me one day and very quietly said, "Hey, Mark." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Come here, I got something to show you." And he takes me over to the trailer behind his truck and drops the trailer. And sitting in the back of his trailer is a toilet. I'm like, "Yes, Tom, that's a toilet." I've seen those before. He's like, "Would you like this toilet?" "Is there a reason I should like this toilet?" He goes, "This is a real toilet. It actually flushes the real amount of water before the new regulation." And he said, "Don't tell anybody I hate this, because it's illegal." Like, so you're turning me into a toilet bandit. But just want you to know, I am a true blue rebel. Yes, I'm a toilet rebel. That's the honest. See, I don't live in California anymore, so I can't get in trouble there. So imagine the founders, the framers, being under this kind of regulation and authority of government. I mean, you think that what Levi Preston was chafing under was absolutely nothing compared to what we live under today. They would find it outrageous. The idea of an income tax from the federal government, they would find outrageous. A standing army, they would find outrageous. And so many simple things in our lives that we just take for granted, they would find outrageous. So you are inheritors of that political DNA. This idea that we have always governed ourselves and we always should. So we come forward to the modern era, and the country is blowing up, right? I mean, yesterday, we had somebody go to a Supreme Court justice's house with the idea of murdering him. Thank God he didn't pull it off. Thank God he didn't even get off the shot, got arrested. Seems like half of our country thinks that's okay. Did you see there was polling that came out today, literally, 50% of Democrats under the age of 40 say it's okay to assassinate your political opponents. That's pretty scary, isn't it? Don't get too smug. 40% of Republicans say the same thing. This is serious stuff. We live in very serious times. In this country today, we don't really like each other. By the way, on that 40% stat, if you hear anybody talk that way, shut it down. I'm just telling you, that's not healthy. We're not going to survive as a country like that. If they want to go off on that tangent, if the left wants to go off, we know where political violence comes from. It comes from the left. Our job is to fight peacefully for as long as we can fight peacefully. So if you think about the country's coming apart, right? And this is a new thing in America. Because if you look at all of American history from the very beginning up until just the last couple of years, we've all always gotten along really well, right? You know?
Kind of.
You don't have to agree with me just because I say it. No, of course not. Our entire history is about fractious, divided, arguing, disputive, we're just like a boiling cauldron of different opinions across this whole country for our entire history. And everybody wants it feel like, people try to make it seem like the media, especially tonight, there's a television special to tell us how much worse this is than it's ever been before in all of American history. That's where they tell us we're at, right? You know, before the American Revolution, like right before the Revolution, leading up to it, you had 13 different colonies, and those colonies all loved each other and got along perfectly. It was like a storybook, right?
No.
They hated each other. They literally hated each other. It was mostly along Christian sectarian lines. You know, the Pennsylvanians hated the Virginians, who hated the Marylanders, and then there was Rhode Island. I don't know, everybody hated people from Rhode Island. I feel like it's still that way today. I don't know what's going on up there. So that's the way the country was. And yet we joined arms and we fought a war against the King of England. Incredible. Our George against their George, right? George Washington, George III, King of England. We joined arms and we fought a war because there was an existential threat. Because they were coming over here to tell us what to do, and thousands upon thousands of Levi Preston said, no, you can't tell me what to do. Existential threat, you turn outward, you join arms with your fellow countrymen, and you face the threat, and that's what we did. And at the end of the revolution, what was so cool, because we actually fought battles together, regiments from different states, standing side by side, fighting side by side, dying side by side on the battlefield. That creates, you know, what we call, military guys call the band of brothers effect, right? And so when the war was over, all these colonies all loved each other, and it was so great, they formed this incredible government where everybody got along, right? No. They hated each other. They went back to their states, they tried to form a government, they called it the Articles of Confederation, right? And under the Articles of Confederation, the primary unifying factor under the Articles of Confederation is, I'm from Pennsylvania and I know better. So I'm going to trust you from Virginia or Maryland or Delaware. And so I'm going to give you no power. And Maryland said the same thing. And small states versus big states. And it was slave states versus non-slave. It was terrible. And in fact, we formed a government that absolutely did not work at all, right? It didn't function because we didn't trust each other. And so then in 1787, we get together in convention. Everybody knows the story, the Philadelphia story, that hot summer we're in convention. But the awesome thing is they get into convention, they close those doors, they board up the windows, and it's like a yoga retreat. Like it's nirvana. Everybody loves each other, everybody trusts each other. No, these guys don't like each other. They accuse each other of stuff. There are parochial interests. You have big states versus small states, slave states versus free states. You have guys in there with personal interests, surveyors that own hundreds of thousands of acres of land or claims of land, one state to another. They didn't like each other. It was hard, and they were there for months, and the convention almost came apart dozens of times. So bad at one point that Franklin calls for prayer among everybody. Remember this? He says basically, we always prayed during the revolution. We came together in this very hall, in Independence Hall, and we prayed for providence, the guidance of providence. And we need to do it now. We have to do it now because otherwise how are we going to form up a great nation without God's guidance? You know that story, right? Everybody knows, like, that story is told over and over. Here's the part of that story that's never told. Do you know they didn't agree to pray? Like, everybody thinks they agreed to pray after that. Like, so the story goes, Franklin calls them to pray, and they all agreed. They couldn't agree to pray because you were supposed to pay pastors at that time, or ministers, to pray for you, to come in and pray for you. And they had an agreement that they weren't going to pay anybody who was at convention, so they couldn't figure out how to do it, so they didn't agree to pray. Now, the good news is, they all decided to go to their own places of worship before they came in the mornings to convention and pray. So they actually did pray, but they couldn't agree to pray together. This is how much they couldn't get along. And out of that bubbling cauldron of distrust and dislike and hatred and anger and envy and greed and personal interest and everything that's bad about human beings because we're all flawed sinners, comes the greatest form of government ever known to man. Not in spite of that stuff, but because of that stuff. Because they come up with a system known as a federalist system. And the essence, the bottom layer of the system of federalism says, don't like you, don't trust you, not going to give you any power over me, don't really like you I'm not so sure about, maybe for now. But we got to do some things together. Because there are existential threats. Because the French, well, they pretend they're our allies, they'd like to take us over. The British, they're not done with us, they'd like to take us over still. You got all kinds of people out there, the Spanish, they got some claims, they'd like to take us over. So we're gonna have to figure out how to get along because there's some stuff we gotta do together, a limited amount of things. 17 original enumerated powers given to the federal government because we had to, because there was an existential threat. So we form up the greatest country ever known on earth, and that is the United States of America. Am I right about that? That's true. That's true. When I came to the United States of America, the great part is after you come out of convention, then what happens is now we're all in agreement, everybody gets along perfectly for the rest of the history, right? Because we're the same as we've ever been. We're fractious. We've got regional differences. We've got state-to-state differences. We've got very fundamental human differences. And one of them that festers, the most important one as part of our national history, is we got the issue of slavery, which is not resolved in convention. And it's a deep, deep wound. It is a sin that we imbue in our Constitution because we know we can't deal with it at the time, but we know that that wound is going to have to be lanced at some point. And in the 1860s, we end up having a civil war over slavery. Right, so a country that doesn't like each other so much that 700,000 of its citizens go to war, killed or maimed in battle, and ultimately we end slavery. And we forced a union on half of the country that doesn't want it. And thank God we did. And thank God good and right and freedom and liberty prevailed. But I just want you to understand the picture. It's not because we all loved each other and because we got along. Because we had a system, ultimately, that could handle this, the system of federalism. And then as you go past the 1860s and go past the Civil War, and everything after that's just easy street, right? I mean, in the South, it's basically they reinvent slavery through Jim Crow laws, and there's all this distrust, and there's all this bad stuff going on all over the country. Mississippi is not the same as New York, and New York is not the same as other states, and so there's all this distrust and dislike among people because we're a big country at that point. We're geographically diverse, we're culturally diverse. Right? If you live in Biloxi, Mississippi, and you go to New York, which most people don't do at the time, what you're going to find is you're going to find yourself in a different country. The culture's the same, it's different, the language sounds different, the food's different, the entertainment's different, everything's different, the transportation systems are different, the cities are laid out differently. It literally is the same if you go from Mississippi to New York as going Mississippi to France. In fact, Mississippi might be closer related to France, right? Louisiana certainly closer related to France. And so we have this diversity in the country. Oh, by the way, when I say diversity, I mean real diversity. Like cultural diversity, thought diversity is what I'm referring to. And so we've got this diversity in the country. And ultimately that stays, that's the nature of the country. And you get to World War II. I'm jumping through history, there's a lot more here, but I'm going to jump through. Get to World War II and something amazing happens in America in World War II, but it's also consistent. I want you to see the through line here. We get to the point where there is an existential threat against the United States of America, right? Fascism is rising around the world. We're attacked by Japan at Pearl Harbor, and we have an existential threat. So what do Americans do? We've already shown this. What do we do when there's an existential threat? We get together, man. We join arms and we turn and we face our foes and we act like, well, hey, we're brothers and sisters. We've always loved each other. What are you talking about? What are you talking about, Willis? Right. Somebody gets my old TV. Thank you. I'm dating myself. So we go to war. We do the impossible, we defeat fascism, we come home, and the country's actually really united at this point in American history. It's pretty extraordinary. It doesn't mean that we're not doing anything wrong, it doesn't mean we've erased all our societal sins, but there is a sense of unity. Women, by and large, have gone into the workforce in bigger numbers than ever before. We've recycled, we bought savings bonds, everybody lost people in the war. We all followed the war together on newsreels and the movie theaters, and we're pretty united. And out of that comes the biggest economic boom period in American history. When we talk about the American dream, that's where it comes from. It's the house and the suburbs. Here, it's the picket fence, it's the 2 kids and the dog, and everybody's chasing that dream. And everybody's working on that together. And we get what I call the veneer of unity. You know, we're here, so I'm going to say, picture Liberty Bell. And you put the veneer of unity over the Liberty Bell, right? It's like this thin layer. And in the 1950s, we get network television, right? I'm not quite old enough. Some of you might be old enough to remember the advent of network TV. Now, network TV means if you lived in Philadelphia, And if you live in Mississippi, you can watch the same television shows, right? You watch The Honeymooners, and you get into Father Knows Best, and Leave It to Beaver, all these things. Now we're watching the same television together. So we're kind of the same, right? Whether we live in Mississippi or Kansas or New York City, we're kind of the same. And because you get the advent of national television, you get the advent of national advertising. So now we start using the same brand of products. So it's Borax soap, it's Lucky Strike cigarettes. I can actually go from New York to Mississippi or vice versa. I can get some of the same products. I'm going to feel a little bit at home. I can watch the same TV maybe in my hotel room in New York that I could in Biloxi, Mississippi. So we're starting to feel the same. The culture is starting to unite all across the country. You go from there, you go into the 1960s, late 50s, early 60s, we get franchising. It's hard to remember before McDonald's was everywhere, Wendy's was everywhere, the same gas station everywhere, the same grocery stores everywhere. That's what it's like now, right? I go to the suburbs, in any state, in any city, it's the same. That's what starts to happen in the 1960s. So now if I wanted to drive my car, get in my Chevrolet, and I want to drive from Biloxi, Mississippi to New York City, along the way I can stay in the same hotel, eat at the same restaurants, shop in the same grocery stores, buy my same Lucky Strike cigarettes at the same gas station all the way. And when I get to New York City, it's not a foreign country anymore. It's kind of the same, except for it's not. And we start to, in the 1960s, realize it's really not. Because in the 1960s, we get another major culture shifting event. You get the Vietnam War. And when the Vietnam War happens, there is a societal schism that takes place. And people that are like me, I was a little kid back then, but if I'd have been alive back then, I'd been thinking, what the hell is going on here? Right? There's people protesting in the streets, they're throwing Molotov cocktails at police, there's half-naked people running away, and psychedelic music, and psychedelic drugs, and free love, and if you were a church-going Christian back then, you're just thinking, oh my gosh, Satan has broken out in the streets all around the country. So you have the veneer of unity, but like the Liberty Bell underneath it, there's a little crack. You know that crack is there. Society starts to peel apart, right? And over the decades, that crack has gotten worse and worse. We still have the veneer of unity. We watch the same TV. Finally, we started getting into national sports leagues, the MLB, the NBA, the NFL. Any hockey fans in here? I'm a hockey guy. So you guys have, yeah, NHL, right? We're not missing a game tonight, are we?
Yes.
Oh, man, I'm so sorry. All right, so we'll watch it later recorded. So all this stuff is happening, and the veneer of unity is still there, but there's cracks taking place underneath. Now I'm going to jump forward. There's a lot more here. We had more time to cover it all, but I'm going to jump forward to right now. So we come to right now. And now in America, if you are a Christian conservative in America, that's how I describe myself, even if you're just a Christian in America, you're looking at what's going on and you're thinking, what in God's name is happening in this country? We got people on television, we got politicians openly professing, we got people in the streets openly professing that you can kill a baby that's 9 months in the womb. That you can kill a baby after it comes out of the womb. And I'm thinking, what happened to safe, legal, and rare? Wasn't that what my opponents used to say on this issue? And now it's like, no, we just kill a baby whenever we want. We're good with that, right? And I'm thinking, I don't know those people. I don't like those people. I'm not even sure I want to be in a country with those people. But that's what I'm thinking, right? And I'm thinking I'm just looking at all the stuff I see on TV. They're teaching my kids that they should be racist. Like, I don't understand this. When I grew up, I don't know about y'all, but when I grew up, the words of Dr. Martin Luther King were a truism. That you judge people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. It wasn't like a discussion that we had about that. There was no debate around that. It wasn't like, oh, is that a good idea? Is that not a good idea? And nowadays in the schools, what they're teaching our kids is you look at somebody's color and then you make a bunch of decisions and assumptions about them like that. First, I'm saying that's evil. That's just evil. That's not how we judge human beings. So I'm looking at those people and saying, that's evil. That's evil. Right? Now they want to teach our kids some weird, bizarre, sexual grooming ideology when they're 5 years old. Like, and I'm thinking, I used to think, man, it was a little bit much in junior high when I had to look at pictures of girls' anatomy, right? It was pretty radical stuff, learning sex education when I was in 6th grade or 7th grade. Now they're teaching 5-year-olds that they're not boys, they're not girls, there are 875 genders, and you can switch between them, and maybe you're actually a cat. I'm just thinking, what the hell is going on here? So that's me in America today. I don't know if that speaks to you. Then the flip side, by the way, is those who have a different ideology than me, what I would describe as the opposite ideology as me. They look at me and they say, there is a 60-year-old white Christian guy. Throw into the fact that I'm Jewish too, so it makes it even messier, right? And so if I'm a 60-year-old white Christian Jew, that means I'm a Nazi, I'm a white supremacist, I'm an Islamophobe, I'm the same as Hitler. I hate women, I hate gay people, and that's the way they look at me, and they're looking at me going like, I'm not sure I want to live in a country with that guy, right? They actually hate us. They hate people like us, deeply hate people like us. So this is where our country's at today. Is that right? You guys agree with that assessment? Okay. So this is where our country's at. So we really don't like each other. Is it worse than ever before? No, it's not. To some extent, with ebbs and flows, we've always been like this. I demonstrated that to you. If I had more time, I could do the entire history of the United States. I could show you how this just ebbs and flows throughout the history of the U.S. It's not worse than ever before. We're not having a civil war right now. We don't need to have a civil war. We're not killing each other in the streets right now yet, thank God. So what are we going to do? The question is, at this point in American history, what are we going to do? Because we have a choice. Because the people always have a choice. You're not just a little cog in the machine. You have free will. We're a church. God gave us free will. We have that free will. We can decide for ourselves what's going to happen in our country. We don't have to listen to Joe Biden. We don't have to listen to Donald Trump. We don't have to listen to Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi or any of those blabbering idiots in Washington, D.C. who think they know how to run our lives. Because we can be like Levi Preston. We can decide for ourselves. So what are we going to do? So I think there are two possible paths here. Path number one is that there is a war. There's actually a civil war. There's a revolution, whatever you want to call it. That is a possible path in our near future, in my opinion. And I hear this from a lot of people on the right, and I think it's highly irresponsible. I'm going to say it out loud here. People say to me, well, I think, Mark, we just need blood to run in the streets. We just need a revolution, and, we need to break this country between the left and the right. We're just going to have to sort it out. And by the way, people on the right have all the guns, so we're going to win anyway. How many people we have in this room that have actually seen combat? Raise your hand if you've been in a war. It's not that many in our society. I got one back there in the corner. We don't want to see that. If you want to know what war looks like, if you really want to see what war looks like, then watch online some of the actual video coming out of Ukraine right now. Because you want to see what war in the United States would look like, that's what it would look like. And dead babies in the streets, grandmas weeping over their kids dead in the streets. That's what war looks like. And when people say that to me, I just think, man, you don't have any idea. And I don't have any idea. I'm not a warrior. I didn't serve. God bless those of you who served. I didn't serve. My son was a Marine. He didn't face combat. But I don't wish that on any society. Certainly don't wish it on our society. That may come to that. I can't guarantee it. I don't control that. Duty is ours. Results belong to God. But I will do everything I can in my power to peacefully prevent that from happening. I won't run if it comes, but I'm not gonna foment it. But that's one option, right? People in Texas, we Texans think we're so great. We'll secede from the Union. How are we gonna do against China? That's gonna be a good one, huh? Texas versus China. Yeah, that doesn't work out so well. And so there's no realistic way to do this. I live in Texas. Everybody thinks Texas is a big red state. Austin? I live just outside of Austin. There's nothing red about Austin. It's dark blue, right? Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. I mean, here, look at the big cities, right? You go out in the countryside here, lots of conservative people, lots of red areas. That's a map of the entire country. But you go into the big cities and they're all blue. How do you divide that up? You have a war, a civil war, and you're like, we're going to get Philadelphia to California. Like, there's just no way to do it. So I don't see any practical way that we divide the nation. And so what do we do? The question is, do we need to stay together? I think that's important, right? Well, what's the through line? I said there was a through line, right? The through line is, do we live in a time when there's an existential threat, right? Is there an existential threat to the United States right now? Yeah. Actually, multiple. The Chinese, I think, are the greatest existential threat that the United States have ever faced. They're inside the United States, right? And they hate us, and they want to destroy us. They believe there's only one sun. They say that means only one empire in the world, and that's China. And they want to destroy the United States. It's an existential threat. I would say Russia, maybe less so today because of what's going on in Ukraine, but Russia, an existential threat. They hate us. They want to destroy us. Don't like our way of life. A lot of other countries. I would say Islamofascism, potential existential threat to the United States of America. I would say the drug cartels on our southern border, potential existential threat to the United States. A lot of existential threats. So that means we got to stay together. We don't like each other. We're frustrated with each other. We're at each other's throats. So what's the alternative? That's it. It's a good thing there's not like a cross up there, because that's really the answer, right? The real answer is turn to God. That's the real answer. But politically, our answer is Convention of States. When I started thinking about all this stuff, and I came up with this idea of how to describe it and go through American history, the honest truth is I didn't think of Convention of States at the beginning of thinking my way through this. I just started looking at American history and trying to figure out where we came from and what we've been through and how did we make it through it and what was the ability, what was it in our structural DNA that allowed us to make it through it. And in the end, I came to federalism. The reason we can stay together is because we are federalists. Because we believe that the centralized government should only do a little bit of stuff and the rest of us should do all of it on our own, out in our own states. And so our choice now is revolution, civil war, destruction, falling to existential threats, or get back to federalism. And how do you get back to federalism? Just so happens we know how, because the founders told us how. The framers said in convention in 1787 on September 15th, we have to give the power to the people acting through the states to call a convention of states to propose amendments to restrain federal tyranny. Do we live under federal tyranny? Okay. Yeah, it's pretty obvious. And so what we do is we call a convention of states, we propose amendments, and we bring the power back to the states. One of the things I hear all the time is, well, it's such a right-wing thing. What's right-wing about that? I'm originally from California. I'm in exile in Texas right now, but I believe in bringing power back to California. I mean, it seems crazy. They're going to do crazy stuff with that power. They're going to continue to destroy their own state. God bless them. Let them do it. I don't want them destroying the whole country, but let them do what they want to do. Let Maryland or New York or whatever do what they're going to do. And even when I'm sitting with our team in Maryland and they know that their legislature is dominated by Democrats, or in Delaware, well, their job is to fight to take that legislature and make it more conservative. But it's not to leave the power in Washington, D.C. So the solution was given to us by the framers in 1787, as ratified in 1789. They knew this time would come, and they were geniuses for structure. They understood that if you had the right structure, then things would work out okay. It's because they didn't believe that human beings were perfectible. It's kind of a leftist thing. They believed that human beings were sinners, that we were flawed, that we would never be perfect, that we needed God, that we needed religion. They said our Constitution was inadequate for anybody but a moral and religious people. Is that true? Yes. Yeah, it's true. Absolutely. Yes, you can applaud for that. So we've got to go back to the foundation. Number one, in my opinion, this is me as a person of faith, we've got to go back to God. If we ignore God in the equation, if we don't think about faith in the equation, then everything's just relative. Then we live in a time of moral relativity and humanism, and you know where that always leads? Always, 100% of the time, killing babies. I mean, it sounds really simplistic, but it's about as evil a thing as I can possibly think of. And without a belief in an almighty God who is just and righteous and good, then you end up killing children. End up in child sacrifice and really horrible stuff. It's the worst thing I can think of, and it's an example of where we're at morally and ethically in society. So we need to go back to the Constitution. We need to go back to God, and Convention of States gave us the ability to go back to the Constitution. That's why I'm doing what I do. I'll close with this, and I'm going to take however many questions you guys want to ask. I do this first because I believe in God. First. Because I think this country is special. Because I think we had God's favor on us. And that's why this country is formed. God gave us free will. I said that earlier. Without God, there's no such thing as free will. That's a philosophical truism. You can try and argue your way around it all you want. We're not just a bunch of meat bags and chemical responses. God put free will on us. And then he gave us the United States as a place where we could exercise that free will in a way greater than any time in human history. If you want to see self-governance in human history, you can go through the entire scope of human history. You have to go all the way back to the Old Testament to find a true self-governing society. Go back to the Judges period of the Old Testament And God told the people, the Israelites, to choose judges from among themselves, right? That's the definition of self-governance. It's kind of weird that God said that about self-governance. He said, choose judges from among yourselves. Who would have been the best person to choose the judges? God would have been the best person to choose the judges, right? Instead, he said, the system of governance I want for you is to choose judges from among yourselves. And so that's what the people did. So here we are living in the modern era. We choose our representatives from among ourselves. That's the system that God ordained for us. That is the Hebrew system of governance. I think it's God's system of governance. So I do it because I believe in God. I do it, number two, because I love my family. Because I got a wife that I've been married to for 28 years. I got parents who are still alive. My parents are in their 80s. I got a son who is a Marine and just graduated from law school. And by the way, he spends every day of his life now suing the Biden administration for other things. My daughter graduated from Hillsdale College. She's a political warrior for a living. She now works for our organization. She's done education reform for years. So I do it for them. I do it for my kids because I got to be able to look at my kids and I got to be able to say, I'm really sorry about what we're leaving you with, but I've done everything I can do. And now the fight is yours. What I can't say, I can't look at my kids and say, I know it's really bad. I know my generation really screwed it up. Sorry about that. It's been pretty good for me. I'm not going to do that for my kids. Like when I die, I don't ever want to feel like, as I'm going home to the Lord, I don't think, I wish I would have fought harder. I wish I would have done more. All right, so I do it for my kids. I look at my parents in their 80s, retired, towards the end of their lives, and I look at them and I think, they gave me what I have, right? And they were willing to do what was right and to struggle and to save and be righteous, moral people, and they gave me what I have, so I owe it to them too. And I owe that debt all the way back to the founders, to Levi Preston. Because when Levi Preston went out on the field of battle that day, it wasn't just for him, it was for everybody that would come after. It's been a lot of generations since. A lot of men and women have given all, right? Think of all the battles, all the wars, everything that people have given up so that you and I could be here today in a church in Pennsylvania on a weeknight talking about how to save the country. We owe it all to those folks. And we have an obligation to do everything we can to pay it forward. Very specifically, I'm going to put something on it, which is I need you to pay it forward. I need you to play your part. I'm playing my part. I'll keep playing my part. Literally, I'll stop when the dirt hits the box above my head and I'm 6 feet under. That's when I'll stop playing my part. The question you got to ask yourself is, what's your part? What are you willing to do? We're all busy. You guys are all way too busy. I know how it is. Nobody's sitting around with time on their hands, eating bonbons and watching TV. We live in a busy world. You got a job, you got kids, you got church, you got school, you got other obligations. You're taking care of parents, you're taking care of family members. You're busy. I know that. What are you going to give? The founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. You guys have heard that phrase, right? We can all repeat it. If I just said the first part, lives, you guys would say fortunes and sacred honor. Really interestingly, and the part that's rarely said that you don't hear is who they pledge that to, what they pledge that to. Did they pledge that to the American flag? No. To Washington? No. To the Continental Army? No. To the new country, the nascent nation? No. They didn't pledge their lives and fortunes and sacred honor to any of that stuff. They pledged lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to each other. That's weird. It's a little bit odd under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? Why to each other? See, because they understood what they were facing. They were going to war. We're in a war. Make no mistake, it may not be a shooting war yet, but we're in a war. We're in a war, and we're going to decide how this war comes out. Is going to decide what the future of our nation is. Does America slide into the ash heap of history like every other republic before, like every other country before it? Or does America prevail against all odds? We're going to decide by the way that we fight this war. And we're going to decide by whether you and I stand together. Ben Franklin famously said that we must stand together or surely we shall hang separately, right? So you're going to get attacked. You're going to get attacked. You're going to get attacked because you're going to wear the wrong shirt, you're going to say the wrong thing, you're going to do something politically incorrect, you're going to get called out for supporting Convention of States, this white supremacist Nazi organization, right? and you're going to get shamed, maybe at church, maybe in your kid's school. You might lose your job. And when you do, who are you going to turn to? And the question is, are we here for each other? This is a really important question. I say this with all seriousness. Every night when I go to sleep, before I go to sleep, I pledge my life and my fortune and my sacred honor. Not to the country, not to the flag, not to the military, to you. Because I have the opportunity to meet you, to hang out with you, to look in your eyes and to know who you are, to know how much you love the country. It's an extraordinary opportunity, and it fills my heart with the desire and the urge and the need to pledge my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor to you. And I mean that in a very specific way. I can say that sort of generally, broadly, it sounds really nice, but I mean, if you get attacked, call us, reach out to us. People try to shame you, if they're slamming you online or whatever, and you need help, let us know, and we'll try to help. Because you're my brothers and sisters in arms. Because if we're going to save this country, we're going to do it together. You know, you heard earlier that there's a blue sign-up sheet, and that'll be passed around. It's back there in the back of the room. That's the place where you put your name down and you pledge your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor, and you say, I'm going to do something. I don't know what it is. I don't know how much time I can give. I don't know how much energy I can give, but I'm going to do something. And so I ask you, my heartfelt plea to you today before you leave is to sign up to do something, and then when you go to sleep tonight, just like I do, think of me in my hotel room over there at the Philly airport, if I can figure out how to get back there. I will pledge my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor for you guys. So God bless you guys. Thanks for having me.
You will not work with more committed, dedicated, and determined people.
I just couldn't sit by anymore and do nothing.
I'm trying to do my little part here in South Carolina to make it happen.
I always said I hated politics, but I found out that you can't really change things if you don't get involved. It's been so fun. I really have loved every minute of it.